everyone. My name is Natalie, and I'm a manager on our public policy and stakeholder engagement team here at the Partnership for Public Service. For those of you not familiar with the partnership, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit working to build a better government and stronger democracy through policy advocacy, leadership development, workforce programming, and convening leaders across organizations and sectors. The most tangible impact is seen through our support for the federal workforce by sharing resources, providing plain language explainers, and amplifying the stories of the incredible work that federal employees do for our country every single day. Thank you for your service. I want to share a few notes before digging into today's conversation and introducing today's moderator and panel. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit a question through the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer what we can. If you would like your question to remain anonymous, please be sure to click on that checkbox before submitting your question. You may hear from my colleague Anthony throughout the webinar, who's joining us to help dig through your questions and keep us on track. Given the complexity and nuances of our topics we discuss, we may not be able to address every question or associated circumstance that comes up today. However, we will continue to hold FedSupport webinars on a regular basis and dig into additional topics. If you missed a talking point or want to revisit parts of our conversation from today that are most relevant to you, you can find the recording on this webinar as well as previous ones on our FedSupport Hub website. The Hub not only contains webinars, recordings, but also houses other critical information to support the federal workforce amid today's changing government landscape. And with that, I will pass it over to today's moderator, Cynthia Vinters, a Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory Managing Director at Deloitte & Touche Government and Public Services.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I think I know many of you on today's webinar, but my name again is Cynthia Vitters, and I'm a managing director here at Deloitte, leading up a lot of the strategic risk services, including enterprise risk and some other related services for the government and public services sector. So I am going to just jump right into our program and start off by introducing our two panelists, or turning it over them actually to introduce themselves. Tamika, can I ask you to go first?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Tamika Edwards. I am a senior manager, senior federal leader for many years of service. But in my service, I've been supporting Office of Inspector General, helping organizations align a strategy, budget, and enterprise risk. Hopefully, I've done a great job ensuring that they're making smarter, transparent decisions. But in addition to that, I do teach at George Mason University, hoping to bring real-world experiences to the classroom. And most recently, where I am today, I serve as the Chief Financial Risk and Performance Officer at the State Department, Bureau of Intelligence and Research, where I launched the Bureau's first enterprise risk management program, built a dashboard for leadership to make real-time decisions. And previously, I worked at HUD OIG, Department of Homeland Security OIG, where I also led enterprise risk management. And I also co-led the Councils of Inspector General, SIGI, where we implemented and produced a practitioner's guide. So I'm excited to be here to share insights with you. Thank you for getting out of bed on this snowy Thursday, and looking forward to engaging. Thanks for having me.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikki Wood. I work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I've been there for almost 15 years. Prior to that, I was in private industry and financial consulting. So my current role, I serve dual hats. I'm the Associate Chief Risk Officer for the agency, but I'm also the Director of Oversight and Accountability. Under my umbrella, we also serve not just in the risk management and enterprise risk management, we also oversee the agency's liaison function with the Office of Inspector General and GAO. So fun times that we get to engage with both sides of the agency, trying to find that neutral space. So that's exciting. Also in the ERM space, I was able to design with my team the agency's first risk appetite and enterprise risk management framework, also establishing our inaugural risk management council, which of course, when we get into our discussion today, we can talk about a little bit about that and the fun we had in getting that all chartered and set up, especially under a new administration. So a lot of great things on the horizon. Really excited to be here, especially with Cynthia and Tamika. Similar to Tamika, I also serve in an adjunct professor role at George Mason. So I enjoy doing that. And that's it. Look forward to talking with everyone.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank both of you again for being part of this today. So just to get right into the questions, I think that probably amongst this community, one of the most top of mind things are recent updates to OMB Circular A123 and A11. Which definitely signal a shift from enterprise risk management as, more of a compliance exercise to more of a strategic capability, which is exciting. And so wondering how both of you have seen this play out in practice, both, in your specific agency that you're in, but then also with colleagues, that you are in touch with across the community. What does good strategic enterprise risk management look like today? Maybe Nikki, ask you to go first.
Yeah, no, thank you. I actually was really excited about the updates. At first, I was concerned when I heard about updates to A123, but more so the updates in A11 really allow for that integration and alignment. It actually gave us the support we needed to make more risk-informed decisions around budgeting, strategic planning. Our agency's in the process of updating our strategic plan. So for us, it was really helpful because we could use this new council and explain to them further, individuals that have never been a part of enterprise risk management, why it's important. So they see A11 and they think budget, strategic plan, right? So now it gave a clear line to the A123 effort, a clear line to why from the office level, we need to identify our risk, how it rolls up to that enterprise level and can have an impact on budget. Big that it helped with in a strategic approach was when creating our operating plans in the budget space, right? We have these risks and enterprise risks that have been identified for the agency along with the risk appetite. So now we can prioritize it. Now we have the space with this update to come in and say, hey, this falls, in an appetite that the agency's open to accept. So maybe this should not be prioritized in what you're requesting, right? Outside of our core functions we have to do. So it was a good, healthy discussion. It took a lot of engagement to really explain how that would work. But for us, focusing on integration, we also did a mapping of the core A11 functions, right? With budget, strategic, evidence and evaluation. And we added in audits as well to see where there's some opportunities to leverage information. And we looked at the processes and saw where should there be connecting points. Where should the budget process inform the strategic planning, which it naturally does, but even on the internal control side, when we're testing controls, identifying our enterprise risk. So for me, it was a great boost to support what we were trying to do. And I don't know, Tamika, if you've had a similar experience, but it kind of gave us the leverage we needed to make those two pieces fit together more easily.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that, Nikki. I think, well, one, it was definitely a much needed change. Really what the updates to A123 did was it reinforced ERM as a core management discipline as opposed to a compliance exercise. It emphasized risk-informed governance, as you mentioned, internal control, integration, and leadership accountability. Meanwhile, what was helpful with A11 is that they complement each other, whereas it increasingly embeds risk consideration into strategic planning, performance management, and budget. So I'm in a financial management role currently. I currently support risk and performance. So this is music to my ears to see this connection. So what it looks like to me, what good ERM looks like today is identifying those enterprise risks, those big ticket items, those big risks, not a lot of the smaller risks, because sometimes that takes a lot of time and energy when it really doesn't get to the root cause of the issues that your organizations are facing. what's keeping your leadership up at night, and attaching those or aligning those to strategic objectives. From there, talking about, performance goals and measures, key performance indicators, key risk indicators that will allow us to trigger or track when the risk may potentially manifest. And making it big enough of a storytelling exercise for leadership, tone at the top, to really tie some resources to it. I think that that's what good ERM looks like, because it's a good management tool that allows decision-making and decision-shaping capabilities.
Thank you, Tamika. So I'm going to move into the next question, and appreciate both of your insights on that. I know it's been, a hot topic, with, differing views on, whether it's positive or negative. And I think that there's a lot of positivity personally coming out of it as well. So ERM during organizational transition, I think everyone has experienced a lot of transition over the last year. So, organizational change, whether it's leadership turnover, budget uncertainty, or mission realignment, can often heighten risk. So, can each of you talk a little bit about how ERM leaders proactively support agencies during periods of transition, rather than just reacting to risks after they materialize?
Tamika, did you want to go first, or?
So I would say, well, a lot of us just experienced a lot of organizational transition this past year. And I would say it is vital that the ERM leader is the orchestra leader, is a jack of all trades, being proactive with getting the leaders that need to be at the table to talk about the change before it comes, being emerging leaders, right? Looking ahead. Because what I've seen happen is change decisions and things of that nature being made without you or without me in the room. And then they're trying to hurry up to get somebody to help them solve a problem when something's happened. So, these things happen all the time. So when we think about A123, we just talked about that question, having ongoing risk assessments and internal control effectiveness will allow you to see these things before it happen and have a plan to help address it. So one example, my organization was looking into, we knew that, the administration wanted to shrink the State Department. So why wait for that to happen? So we started thinking about some scenarios and some scenario planning, some plans that we can offer up that the administration, that our leadership can consider, as opposed to waiting for someone to write the story for us. So I would say, being proactive by reevaluating enterprise risk is what I would recommend. I would say identify risks that will impede your strategic objectives is key. I know it's cliche, we say it all the time, but it's so important, because if you allow, like I'm talking about the leadership changes and, some of the risks and things that happened last year, you could miss out on key personnel doing critical work if you're not ahead of the game with, being at the table with some of these decisions, and really articulating and understanding what your risk appetite is, and when there should be some escalation thresholds identified. And so those are just some key tidbits that I thought with hearing this question.
Yeah, and so this was actually a very unique period, I want to say, over the last year and a half. So not only was it a new administration, my specific office, the CFO's office, was going through a reorganization, plus, reductions in staff. So that's always that just natural change management. And we were retiring the prior administration's enterprise risk. So, a lot of change, a lot of change. One of the things that I think helped us be successful was, one, finding out the expectations of leadership from the beginning, right? And so from the beginning, we knew they only wanted to focus on what is statutorily required. So, you have to keep that in mind, because you also have fewer resources. We knew that we weren't getting more resources. So when you get a lot of enterprise risk around human capital, that might not be realistic, right? Because we're not going to get additional resources for those. But also leveraging what we already had, the information we had. we realized that there's a lot of information in separate places that we could actually leverage to get a better sense of what our risk appetite is, right? Just looking at trends. But another one is benchmarking. I mean, I've even reached out to Tamika. Hey, do you have anything in this space? In that benchmarking and having peers within the ERM community is critical. So I want to say that you're going to go through transition every time. It's the nature of federal government. Whenever there's a new administration, they're going to have different priorities, different ways that they like to conduct business, for lack of a better phrase. So that's kind of at the top, right? The top down, looking at it from that lens. But the engagement was critical from the actual individuals who are identifying the risk and doing the actual work. So one of the things that I did was implemented risk liaisons, right? Some agencies with more mature enterprise risk management programs already have this, but we implemented risk liaisons so that each office had a person that they could go to and ask the questions. They didn't have to go through a supervisory chain. They just had a direct touch point. So that human aspect of it was critical. So yes, we needed the buy-in from the top. We needed their goal and objective, but we also needed to make sure that the quality of what we were getting was not, I don't have time for this, so let me just check the box, but actually made sense and folks understood how this could be useful, how it could help them, and trying to convince their leadership why they needed a new system, why they needed training in a different space. So, and Cynthia, kind of ties back into the first question where focusing more on objectives versus the risk itself or the control in that shift that we saw in A11 and A123.
Thank you. Thank you. So positioning ERM tool, risk insights to executive decision-making and agency priorities. Nikki, you want to go first?
Sure. No worries. I mean, I touched on it a little bit of what's important to our leadership, right? What's important to them. When a new administration comes in, again, as I mentioned, they have new priorities. So you really need to know what they want to accomplish, right? Some of that is going to be clear with your goals and objectives, and some of them might not be that clear on what they want. Or might be brand new to you as an ERM practitioner. So one of the things that was really helpful was one, connecting the dots for them, because ERM is not their top priority when they come into the organizations, right? So they're thinking about the mission, the money, right? Mission and the money. That's typically where, and then making their boss, right? Whether it's Congress, the president, pleased with their work and how they're carrying out the mission at their agency. So making sure they understood at their level why this is important or how it's going to allow the agency to meet their goals that they want to set. So that's been really important early on. So having a governance structure has been key, because that governance structure really was your champion. Each of them are going to have their own goals that support this one main goal or mission for the agency. So that governance structure has been important. And then proof, like the proof is in the pudding, being able to show them this is how it's been effective, just kind of saying it and giving them the technical terminology that probably wasn't going to cut it, but showing, hey, this is how we were able to reduce the steps in this process. This is how we were able to, meet or pass our target by like 23%. Being able to show that, right? By doing this was the outcome. That helped quite a bit. So if you're more mature in your program, so you can have residual versus inherent risk, that's really helpful, because you can see how much this risk reduced. And that's because of this program, and aligning that to what's important to them.
Yeah,
Mika, how about you?
No, that was perfect. I was just thinking my top three things Nikki just covered is making sure you certainly align the risk to what your leadership cares about. With leadership transition, not everybody comes in loving ERM, or even knowing a lot about it. So you spend a lot of time getting them up to speed with enterprise risk management and the value and the benefits of having a program. So really focusing on showing them the value in terms of how they could be, or how this will help them be strategic enablers for strong decision making. So outcomes are key. I would say currently, for the past maybe 5 years, we've been trying to get funding, to reduce our tech debt. And we've been trying all different strategies. It wasn't until we added some risk elements, we combined the compliance concerns, like not meeting FSMA or FITARA or whatever the case may be. So we already knew that, but then we said, okay, what's the other part, that we're missing in terms of root cause? So when we started diving deeper, we realized that there's some funding issues and we hadn't been telling the story. So we worked with our leadership to help them to understand what the root cause was. It's not just solely about not meeting compliance. It is resources, not just funding, but personnel that we needed to address. And then we said, well, okay, there's a risk element to this. If we don't do these things, it could potentially shut down our IT system across, not just the Bureau, but across the department. And that is what he cared about. And that is when we started seeing that the connection with strategy. We started making connections with the performance, and we started building into our budget justification the funding needed to buy down that risk. So I think, it's not just about understanding, what the leadership cares about. It is making it actionable and showing them the quick wins by using a risk management framework that works. So, I think the key point to that is, outcomes and quick wins, because if you're constantly going through the rigmarole of a ERM program as it's written in the playbook or as it's written in A123, et cetera, but there's no real value shown, then it's hard to keep it going. So try to find some quick wins along the way while still managing and implementing your program and governance structures.
I was going to ask Tamika a follow-up question, but Cynthia, I think I see there's a question in the chat for us.
There is, yeah. And I was going to just pause and go ahead and go to that question before we move into a different segment. And the question is, could each of you speak a little bit more about how you formalized roles for the political senior leaders for ERM governance? Who signs off on the risk profile and appetite statements? Is it the deputy secretary or someone else?
I can take that since I see I'm off mute first. So I will say that the formalized roles came through a charter. We have a risk management council charter. It lists out by role, not name, who is on the council, who is responsible for what in their role. So that was signed by our deputy administrator. So that would be the equivalent of your deputy secretary, I'm assuming, who signed that. So that individual also serves as the chair for the council. So the council is it's comprised of both political appointees and career appointees, typically at the SES level. And the council votes on the enterprise risk, which then result in the enterprise risk profile. However, our chair does have the option to say yay or nay. So they have the final decision authority. And so really the charter lays it out. We do have a chief risk officer that is mentioned in the charter as well, who is responsible for the entire program and facilitates all the work for the agency, which is where, my team does a lot of the lifting, in air quotes. So, but yeah, the charter is the key thing, because you want to document it. Because I have audit space in the back of my mind, I keep hearing if it's not documented, it never happened. So that's a great way, especially at that very senior and political appointee level, to make sure that they sign off on that. But I don't know, Tamika, if you all have a different approach.
Yeah, so we're at the Bureau level. So there is a department enterprise risk management program. But for our Bureau, we do have a charter as well, and a risk management council, and the assistant secretary signs off on the risk profile. But similar to what Nikki indicated in the earlier response, we do have risk champions that help to identify from the bottom up, and then we do interviews from the top down to identify those risks and come together with a compilation of risks. And of course, there's a lot. Like I said, there could be a lot. So, using the Enterprise Risk Management Working Group, which is another part of the governance structure to help, refine and reduce the number to really focus on those key enterprise risks, are then brought to the body, to the board. They'll make some determination, and then, as Nikki indicated, the assistant secretary or the leader of the organization makes the final call.
Hey, Cynthia, is there time for me to ask a follow-up question to Tamika? So just question, right? Because I'm curious. Like, I know for our council, we go, and when the deputy administrator just can sign off and say that's it. For you, because you said it's the bureau level and it rolls up, like, what is the process for rolling up? Is that, I know you kind of said you hand it off, but any insight into how that process works?
I wouldn't necessarily say handoff. We just don't want to operate in a silo. If there's departmental risks that align to the risk that we've identified, that there may be a broader approach to how we address it at the department level. But it's really just a sharing avenue so that we're lockstep with what the department's doing and aligned to the department's or the administration's priorities, the department's strategic plan, and things of that nature. But we do very much have our own enterprise risk management program. There's only probably about 5 programs across the department, over 45 bureaus within the Department of State. So I think that's pretty good. And we are a lot more mature than many of the other programs. But yeah, we maintain our risk solely within the bureau. But what I want to tap a little bit, if I may, Cynthia, just to talk about just the connection with your OIGs. Obviously, you need to maintain independence, but I would leverage their reports, the tools, their conversations, whatever recommendations as a tool in your ERM program, because they're looking under the hood too and finding gaps, a risk, or opportunities, vulnerabilities that maybe you as a risk manager may not see. So I know sometimes, I've been in the OIG environment and I've heard that it's not always that great of a relationship, but as an orchestra leader, as a jack of all trades looking to facilitate these strategic conversations, I would challenge you to start building those relationships.
I echo that 1,000%. There's so much good information, whether you agree or not. There's good information in the findings and recommendations.
Thank you both. So we're going to just move into a little bit different topic now, which is just skills for the next generation of ERM professionals. So as ERM continues to mature, I want to get both of your perspectives on what technical, strategic, or interpersonal skills are becoming most critical for practitioners who want to stay relevant and continue to advance in their careers.
I'll go. Automation, AI. I mean, there's no other way to say it. I'll give you a prime example. When we were doing the analysis for the agency's risk appetite, I mean, there's hundreds of risk at the office level, and having to review every single risk on the risk registry to identify things. I mean, that is a manual analysis versus having some sort of AI tool that could look for themes and commonality. That's one. 2, we're working with less. So how can we automate something, right? We have fewer resources, which means fewer people to do things. So you think less time. So if there's a way to automate something where there's a workflow. So if you have to get signatures, you're not waiting with someone's inbox. There's, a tool that will do it. We were in the process of trying to onboard a GRC tool, ran into some challenges. So thankfully, some of our more tech savvy team members, SharePoint based, there's things that are available, whether it's Microsoft Form, whether it's Click dashboarding, like there's a lot of free training and resources there. But the biggest thing that comes to mind is to just make sure that you stay open to using automation and AI to help you do some of the work. Because depending upon the size of your organization, you may have hundreds, if not thousands, of risks that you're going to have to find some themes and trends and commonalities. So The good thing is, unfortunately, we had to do that manual analysis. But then when there was a tool that was being piloted in the agency and we ran the same data, we got the same results. So that's a good thing, right? So that we weren't far off, or that, because machine learning has to be trained, right? In a certain sense of what to look for. So we were able to do that. So I think, finding ways to automate, leverage information you have, having to fill out a Word document versus filling out a Microsoft form is very different to folks, to building that in. So just making sure you're using technology as much as you can to reduce burden. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is reducing burden to the agency.
Yeah, to add to that, I know I talked about being a great facilitator, being able to have executive level conversations and communication, mainly from a plain language standpoint, is important, because we often come with our technical jargon with ERM, and talking about heat maps or talking about risk appetite or whatever the case may be, whatever the language is, not all leadership is up to speed with that, and they can get turned off really quickly. In addition to AI and staying abreast of technology, I would say staying relevant to today's risk, or even what's emerging. With climate change, I know it's not really an administrative priority right now, but it is creeping. It is something that's going to happen down the line. Supply chain issues, third-party issues. So, making sure that we have plans in place within your entities to address that is important. Using data based on the technology to spot trends. And I would even recommend or suggest stress testing. I mean, I think it takes ERM from a theoretical perspective to a practical perspective when you do scenario planning, and learn how to do scenario planning or tabletop exercises, because it not only gets expertise from your organization in the room, it gets them talking, it gets them understanding what this is all about, and it gets, you basically get the buy-in from them on, how you're going to address the risk, and there you have supporters now that will go back to their leaders and share that. I will say with AI, it was really helpful for me in the OIG space. I don't know if this is still an issue today, but sexual misconduct was an issue when I was in the OIG. And the hotline organization had only about 3 or 4 individuals looking through all the hotline complaints that came in. So we started looking into, and we actually invested in machine learning to help us sort through all of those complaints. And from there, we didn't not to say that it takes away the person. We need a human element, but it helps, right? Sift through all that information. So I do agree, technology is key. Plain language with communicating to leadership is important skill to have. Being able to facilitate with various individuals at the leadership level and the working level to get them to understand how important this is, ERM that is, and how it could really move the entity forward would be some key attributes that I would suggest in this role.
And just to add one simple thing, and I swear my team says they're going to give me a t-shirt that says this: be curious, right? Be curious. I think that one of the things in being able to move ERM from a check the box, right, and really implement those changes is to be curious. A lot of times you're going to get information and say, here it is, I checked all the boxes, but does it make sense, right? Like, I think Tamika said jack of all trades, and I feel like that should be the title behind anyone's name in the ERM space. Like, jack of all trades, master of none, because you have insight into so many things. And sometimes what seems like a simple question can actually uncover a lot of information there. So 100% be curious.
Okay, great. So just as far as translating ERM experiences, and we're going to get it. I know we have the resume workshop. There are many professionals exploring career mobility across government and the private sector. And so what aspects of federal ERM experience do both of you think translate most strongly outside of government, and how can practitioners articulate that?
I think it all translates. It's all transferable. I mean, just having the ability to implement ERM within a highly structured governance and accountability environment, I think translates beyond federal. I mean, it could be in the private entity or organizations. It could be a nonprofit. Because you're not just talking about risk, you're talking about operationalizing it through internal controls, through documentation. Leadership decisions could happen whether you're in the federal organization or private. I would say, I mean, there's strategic planning that happens in the private entity as well, and performance. I know that there might be different tools that the private entities use, like COSO or ISO 31000, but there's some similarities in all of those different guidances that help us to implement and understand enterprise risk management. I think it's important to transfer or take with you, whether or not you're in the federal space or the private, risk considerations and how they align to strategy, budget formulation, and performance outcomes. So I think most of the skills, all of the skills that you have from a federal space does translate to the private space as well.
Yeah, I would add on that. I mean, I echo everything Tamika said. Of course, I always echo what Tamika says, but more seriously, you know, KRIs, key risk indicators, key performance indicators, right? Like every organization, for-profit, nonprofit, always has goals, right? Especially even if you're just more in the financial space, as far as we have a budget, we don't want to overspend, we don't want to underspend by too much because you don't want to make it seem like you don't need those resources. But I think those indicators are a great tool that really, from a technical aspect, can be used in both spaces, right? Because they kind of guide you moving to what are our goals, what are our objectives, and what are the indicators to let us know that we might not be meeting them, or maybe we're surpassing them so much that maybe you need to adjust, right? What those targets are. So that's another good tool. You know, every time I have to go to the Green Book, and yes, I still go to the Green Book sometimes. Every time I go there, I think that's another one. Understanding your control environment is extremely transferable, right? I mean, honestly, there's not really one thing that I would say is not transferable from a technical terminology, but I think, you know, those items, the things that Tamika mentioned, governance, I'm going to reiterate what she said as far as a governance structure, having that buy-in at the top is of course extremely important. I think kind of consistent amongst private and federal as well. So, you know, I wish there was one specific thing I could say. Even in my short time in private industry, there were still boards, right? You had your board of directors. So you still had the decision makers, you still had targets, right, that you had to reach and accomplish, especially at you know, the more senior supervisory level. We all have performance evaluation. So even for ourselves, there are targets and goals that we have to meet and accomplish. So, you know, there's a lot of things I think when we do our day-to-day business that is actually all internal controls and risk management. You're just not intentionally calling it that from a technical aspect.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that where, you know, regardless of what space you're looking to move into or transition into, where you as practitioners can strengthen your mobility is how you articulate your experience, not so much the federal terminology or the way you define it in the private space, but it helps to translate the work into outcomes when you're talking, you know, to whoever's looking to hire. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you both. So I know we touched a little bit on AI. I want to go a little bit further just around from data analytics to emerging AI. What role do you see these roles playing in strengthening ERM programs, and how can practitioners use them responsibly, not replacing judgment and expertise, but leveraging it?
I can go first. You know, AI, really modern tools just make ERM continuous, right? And quantitative and actionable. They also can help with visibility when you're thinking dashboards across your agency, right? So leadership can go in real time. You can go in real time. It it can detect emerging risks, right? Because data analytics, I think Tamika touched on this earlier, as far as trend analyses, right? You can see that and see if there's something emerging. I think that it shows progression and maturity as well. I touched on this earlier, taking a very manual process that took hours, if not days, right? Turning it into something that literally could be run in less than 30 minutes, right? And then looked at. So I think it just allows you to quantify something that can be very subjective when it comes to ERM. But, technology evolves. So it's kind of a continue, and that's the continuous in part, right? Because it's always changing. But I mean, it's been really helpful for us as far as like our risk registry, tracking that. This is something that used to be in Excel, right? And so trying to do a control left to look for words or find something that's a theme in it versus having it laid out. And I know this is related to technology as far as how your risks are categorized. We have a taxonomy, but using those labels within technology and how you organize or what groups risks fall into is like strategic, operational, programmatic, legal compliance. Technology allows you to dashboard that. Like, well, how many risks are falling in legal and compliance, reputational? How high are they? Are they being lowered? Who owns the majority of the risk? So technology to tells a story. Like, Tamika, I know you touched on that earlier. Like, it helps you tell the story, because some people are just visual. They just need to see it to believe in it.
Yeah, the real value, I think, with AI and machine learning, I talked about one example earlier, is really to help you see the risk earlier. Saves you time, helps you prioritize better, and make smarter decisions quickly. Especially in this climate where a lot of us have constrained resources. Another example currently that we are using here at the State Department to leverage AI is with our issue briefs. So we have to write papers and get intelligence quickly to our policymakers. So how best to get something quick, short, not long, something that they can grab and take on the plane with them right before they go to whatever country, then to leverage AI. It helps with edit capabilities as well, so you're not spending so much time on it, but it doesn't take away from having that human judgment, like Cynthia says. I think it's really great to leverage technology, particularly AI and machine learning, but it all comes down to your agency's risk appetite. Because I know some leadership may not be ready for this type of technology, but I think it's worth looking into.
Thank you both.
Yep, I'm so on mute. Sorry, Cynthia, do I have time to add on to that?
No, you do. Yes. We're
Okay,
actually a
thank
little
you.
bit
It's
ahead
like,
of
let me
schedule.
ask for just to add on to that, aside from using it in ERM, right, and how you manage the program and do analytics, it's also something that can be leveraged as a resource in managing enterprise risk. I'll give you a great example, water infrastructure systems, right? A lot of the water infrastructure systems are kind of monitored with technology, right? As far as levels, as far as there's an unknown chemical in there and testing it. There's a big push as far as like cybersecurity and how, data and so forth can help manage that. So there's partnership opportunities as well. I know our administration, we have a chief information officer. That's a political appointee now. They are like, hey, where can I come in and automate? So there's opportunities there as well. So if you don't know who your CIO is, you might want to ask and see. But maybe, as a mitigation or monitoring, using technology is an option as well, especially if you don't have the, resources, or you don't have the time to do what we had to do with that manual. You can tell I'm still kind of traumatized from doing that manual review of it. But, technology can also be a tool outside of just running your program, but also in how you help mitigate or monitor some of those risks or enterprise risks.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we don't have, I think I do see another question from the audience. What is the value of investing in a CRO certificate or training program to be competitive for the private sector or the public sector? I know both of you have opinions on that.
Tamika, you want to go first?
Yeah, for me, I say go for it. Why not be a continuous learner? There's always something you can learn that could help to advance you further in your career. I would say being a graduate of George Mason University as well and attending some ERM classes with George Washington University. It only helps with, networks, sharing information, staying relevant, staying abreast of new information and new ways. And even to this day, Nikki and I graduated in 2023 from George Mason, and we're still connected. Our cadre is still connected, sharing information, sharing resources, and that's what it's all about. Now, in terms of having it on your resume, I'm not sure what the hiring manager is looking for, but when you talk the good talk and you are a game changer in that interview and you talk about your experience, that's how you're going to get through the door.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it plainly, leverage, right? I mean, let's just shooting straight. Especially when, at least for those who your ERM programs are not as mature, or you don't have an already established CRO or risk management office, it gives that credibility, right? You're getting a very focused, specialized training. As Tamika said, we both participated in that. So aside from having that someone that knows nothing about ERM, you're like, oh yes, I completed this CRO certificate training program. And for me, it worked out tremendously because that was part of the leverage that we used to convince the agency that they needed a CRO because, EPA did not have one prior to 2024, right? They didn't. So, that was a huge bump like, oh, now I have all this information and resources to help push this even further. Why you need it. I felt like I was in a marketing pitch, but it worked out to be successful. So I'm okay with that. But it does give you that leverage. It gives you that credibility. And it also just expands your knowledge, right? You get to see it from more than just what are your risks and controls. You're looking at business continuity. You're looking at change management. There's so many other things that are part of that program. And I promise that they're not paying me to push it, but there's so many other things that are part of that program that really just kind of help make you well-rounded, right? In that space.
Thank you both. And then it looks like there's one more question. What are some of the competencies besides curiosity and situational awareness that have served you best in your ERM leadership roles?
I would say being a change agent, a transformational leader. I would say the ability to build coalitions is very key. The ability to, I mentioned this earlier, storytell. So written, oral communication is important. The ability to connect with whatever audience you're speaking to by nature of your storytelling capabilities. You don't have to be an accountant. You don't have to go to school for risk management to be a risk manager. You can use, the hairs on the back of your neck to help with judgment, but understanding, the tools, the risk tools and things of that nature will help, but being able to articulate that to an audience that, aren't really skilled in risk management will be key too.
Yeah, so personality, no, I'm kidding. That helps. But, so kind of pretty much what Tamika said, right? Just your coalition and your network is going to be really key. So, not everyone likes having to meet strangers and talk to strangers. Go to the trainings, go to the conferences, meet people, network, connect. I can't even stress enough how much, kind of the cadre of individuals that I've met and worked with have helped support building out programs, help support, that benchmarking piece that was needed. They knew about resources I might not have known about. Like that engagement and networking has been key. And then also the socialization, right? How you communicate. A lot of people hear risk and they're thinking, oh, that's not good. That doesn't mean it's happening. That just means that this is something we don't want to happen. We want to focus on it. Let's make sure everything's in place. So, that socialization and how you communicate it. Change management is a real thing. If you participate in the program, there's a whole session on it, and how you can, work with that. And sometimes it's okay not knowing something. So at least where you need to connect with someone. So again, that all goes back to that coalition Tamika mentioned as well. So, I think those I'm still going to fall on being curious, but those will help out a lot tremendously in being successful in that role.
Yeah, if I may add a couple more that just came to mind. The ability to be persuasive or to negotiate is a key skill. And another one that comes to mind is political savvy, right? Because like we talked about, we have some politicals that we have to engage with. We have administrative priorities. Sometimes, you might have to adjust the risk based on that. Sometimes not, but being able to communicate and be savvy from a political standpoint is important as well.
There's one more question, actually a few. One was a follow-up on data storytelling. Is that an important skill to have in ERM? What does a visual mean?
Yes.
Or take that.
Yes, I think that's a skill to use in any business practice, right? When you're trying to, kind of report out, brief out, or get decisions is storytelling. Like, how do you tell the story, right? Does it flow? But data storytelling, the data supports. You want to be able to have quantitative and qualitative aspects incorporated into your presentations, especially around decision making. It's great to have an opinion, but I say this all the time, facts over feelings, right? Because you need to have the data to support what you are trying to get approval on, or what you're trying to convince. So, that means charts, graphs, trend analyses, like anything to put it in a visual, to help guide where you want their eyes to focus on, so that you can tell the story behind what this number means or what this chart means.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that other than the fact that the fact that just giving leadership a spreadsheet doesn't work. So being able to visualize the data in a way that they would understand is important too, because I think we can get really interesting with our graph development and charts, and it still goes above our leadership's head. But finding a equal like a medium for them to be able to see what you're trying to tell them. What I'd like to say quickly about, leveraging the qualitative data and the quantitative data when you're doing your risk assessments, oftentimes you have like a 3 and you maybe put a yellow or orange for the level risk that it is. But when you start adding even qualitative data through maybe it's scenario planning per se, where you're looking at representative case and worst case scenarios, that all of that data, the graphs, the risk scoring, the qualitative storytelling helps to give them a better picture as to the risks that they're facing. Otherwise, it looks like just an exercise, a theoretical exercise that will never happen, and it's not real to them, and they don't want to make a decision because it doesn't make sense to them.
And then it looks like, and this is probably our last question before we have to switch over to the resume workshop, just around how you prioritize the trainings and certifications that might be valuable. CRMA, CIA, CGFM, PMP, probably RIM, CRMP, Fed. How would you prioritize in relation to movement within and outside of government? Just a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, I'm going to say that you need to know yourself and your skill set very well to know how to prioritize that. If I don't do project management well, then I'm going to want the project management certification. If I don't understand what it means to be curious and, verify the verification, I might want the CIA, certification. So it really depends on your skill set. Where do you see that there's gaps, right, in your skill set that, would help you be a stronger leader in ERM. So that's how I would prioritize it. I don't think it's a one size fits all. It really depends on, you as an individual and where you see that there's an additional tools that are needed.
Yeah. And budget, if your organization is, you
Yeah.
can prioritize by budget, you can prioritize by need. You also can prioritize by time commitment, because some of those, the listing that you provided, may be shorter in time or longer in time. So it all depends, like Nikki said, on you.
Well, I want to thank you both again for all of your valuable insights this afternoon. And I want to also thank the audience. It's great to see we had about 60 people on today. So love to see that. I want to thank everyone just for, your time today. And I think from here, what we were going to do was a quick poll to try to get a little bit of feedback from all of you on, how we best continue with our series. So I'll just go ahead and read through these on a scale of 1 to 5. 1, not effective, 5, very effective. How effective was this webinar in answering your questions? And then the second question, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with the following statement? I learned something new in this webinar that I will apply moving forward. And then the other questions, they're actually just obtaining feedback from you. What other topics would you like to see covered in future sessions? What resources would you like in the future? And any additional FedSupport or webinar feedback you might have. So if you don't mind taking a moment, those of you in the audience to answer these, we would greatly appreciate it so that we can continue to bring you effective programming.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that. Thank you, Nikki and Tamika, for joining us for our panel, and Cynthia for moderating a great panel. I will keep the poll open as we bring on my partnership colleagues, Katie and Kristen, for the webinar workshop that we have attached with our discussion today. I will let them introduce themselves and dive into their workshop.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. That was a really excellent panel. And now it is the role of my colleague, Kristen, and I to provide you with some tangible, high-level career advice. Our time is short together, about 30 minutes, so we're going to try to get through all of our content. Of course, this is recorded, so don't feel pressured to take copious amounts of notes. And we, of course, will try to leave some room at the end. So really briefly, I'll introduce myself, then pass to Kristen, and we will get into it. So my name is Katie Hogan. I'm a director here at the Partnership for Public Service and have been here for about 4 years. I oversee our early career talent work stream. So I oversee all of our relationships with colleges and universities about building talent pipelines and making students aware of opportunities in federal government. They're often just not aware, especially those outside of the kind of political science and public policy worlds. I also oversee our internship program. So the partnership oversees a program called Future Leaders in Public Service, where we place students into state and federal internships to get them interested in hopefully pursuing careers in civil service. Prior to that, I did work as a career coach in a higher education context for about a decade. So my colleague Kristen and I have been providing a lot of, through FedSupport, similar content to make sure folks have what they need if they are undergoing or anticipate they may navigate a job search. Kristen, do you want to introduce yourself briefly and then I can get into it?
Sure. Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Carroll, a manager on the workforce programs team here at the partnership. Like Katie, I support our early career talent initiatives. I've been at the partnership for 1.5 years, and prior to that was in higher education, specifically career development, for 12 years. That is the work that led me to supporting our FedSupport work and our Career Pivot Bootcamp that you'll hear more about in a moment. But bringing all of that background in supporting students and alumni in their career searches, and also working with employers to understand how they're hiring, what they value and look for, and happy to share more with you today.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. So we're going to talk about how to translate your experience into a strong resume. Of course, you are all seasoned professionals and have a resume, but we're just going to do some reminders and high-level tips and tricks, especially if you plan to craft a resume for outside of government. With that, we'll go to the next slide. I do just want to spotlight, and maybe some of you are already aware that as part of the many resources offered by FedSupport at the Partnership for Public Service, we do offer a free, fully asynchronous career pivot bootcamp. So we can get you the link in the chat, but this QR code will take you to that resource as well. This is a career pivot bootcamp for anyone who's in federal government or was in federal government that, again, really just wants to refresh all aspects of their career development. We know sometimes careers, you may be in place somewhere at the same employer or agency for years or even a decade. So it's a really great refresh to go in and really ask yourself, what is the difference between federal and non-federal resumes? How do I build a LinkedIn or update a LinkedIn if I already have one? What's going on with cover letters? How to prepare for interviews, and so much more. So we know a lot of the career development process can look different outside of federal government. So this is really meant to acclimate you to every aspect of that development process and give you what you need to navigate a job search. And I'll say, even if you anticipate staying in federal government, perhaps making a move, this may not be a bad idea either. So take a look, totally free. Natalie's got it in the chat. Thank you, Natalie. Okay, but today with our short time, we are just going to focus mostly on resumes. So with that, I'll talk a little bit more about resume components. So what goes into a resume? Now, I will just share at the top, I know that if you are someone who's been with a federal resume for many years, or to get you into the current role that you have, it is likely that you use the federal resume format. For years, we've all known the federal resume format to be really different than industry or non-federal resumes, and that it can pretty much be as long as you need. It can be inclusive and very detailed of all your previous professional experiences. And we know that that's changing. We know that OPM has made some announcements that they're going to move to a shorter resume that highlights just the most relevant skills. So really encourage you, we understand those changes. I just wanted to name that, but really encourage you to stay in touch with OPM and USA Jobs. Their LinkedIn pages do a great job of any changes there. But today we're going to talk about resume components for the standard 1 to 2 page outside of government, what we typically call an industry resume. Okay, so key resume components, probably no big surprises here, but to make sure we're all on the same page, you do want a really clear header. So that is going to be inclusive of your name and your contact information. Your address is optional. And then something that may be new if you haven't been on a job search for a while, you'll want to link to your LinkedIn profile. It's optional, but it's a nice thing to do because it quickly allows them to click and navigate to your LinkedIn page and confirm that you are who you say you are. If you don't include your LinkedIn link, no big deal, but please know that they probably will. If they're pursuing your application, considering inviting you to an interview, they're likely going to go there anyway. This is totally optional. Some folks put a professional summary at the top under their header, but before the experience section. I am personally, as a career coach, ambivalent. I just always encourage folks, if you're going to include the summary, make sure that it adds something, that it is eye-catching, that it is succinct, that it gives the hiring manager some really valuable information right away, and that it is a value add, not a reiteration of what is to come in the content under your experience section. I am sure you have all heard this before, but particularly in private sector or outside of government, hiring managers typically spend less than a minute sometimes on resumes, which I know is really difficult. So you do really want to use that, I often say, precious real estate of that 1 to 2 page carefully, which is why I share that summary is fine, but optional, because you don't want it to simply be redundant. Okay, and then the really good stuff, the experience section. So that is where you're going to put all of your professional and relevant experience. You're going to put that in reverse chronology, meaning the most recent and on down. So for every experience, you do want to include, obviously, the employer name, the job title, the dates that you were employed. If you're still there, of course, you'll put the date you started to the present, the location, and then you're going to include bullet points highlighting your responsibilities and achievements. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But I am a really big fan of bullet points because, again, the resume is typically reviewed only very briefly by a human. In fact, it might first be reviewed by a AI tool, which was some of the discussion we just heard from the panel. I think the bullet points really give you the best chance to convey succinctly and quickly and effectively who you are, what you're about, the skill and value you bring, and the outcomes and results that you have driven in your past experiences. You also, under your experience section, want to include your education. You will put your highest degree, so kind of that reverse chronology first. You can keep this really high level. You obviously want to put the university, the degree that you received, as well as the, you don't have to, it's optional, but you can put the year. If you've also, I know certifications were also some questions you all had for the panelists. If you have received any certification, perhaps you have your PMP, for example, you can put that there as well. And then this is kind of choose your own adventure beyond the header, the experience, and the education. You can choose additional sections if you like, and if you have the space. So you can have a skills section where you expand upon your skills, for example. Skills can be technical, they can be language. So if you speak a second or third language, that can certainly go there, for example. Volunteer work. So we are so much beyond what professional roles we hold, of course. And sometimes those volunteer affiliations and engagements share more about us that may be attractive to an employer. For example, for the last decade, I have gone to a local nonprofit at least once a month that provides nutritional meals to folks who are perhaps immunocompromised or perhaps dealing with a health struggle that makes it difficult for them to obtain their own groceries and cook nutritious meals for themselves. That is just something that I really enjoy and believe in and enjoy going with my volunteer group friends. But that might be interesting to a potential employer for a variety of reasons. Perhaps the potential employer aligns with that mission in some way. Perhaps that potential employer has also engaged with the nonprofit where I volunteer. Or perhaps it's just important to you to signal that this is part of who you are. Whatever it is, it's up to you, it's your discretion. These optional sections are a little bit more of what's important to you and what matters. And then finally, awards, honors, professional affiliations. So perhaps you were recognized for your excellent work at your current or previous roles. You can certainly list that there. Perhaps you're in a professional association. Perhaps you've had a leadership role in that association. You definitely want to mention that. I will just note, I've sometimes seen federal employees, especially in this last year where Kristen and I have done more FedSupport work, if they received a distinction or an honor or recognition that's really known at their agency, they've done it as a bullet point under that respective experience in their experience section. I also think that's okay. I've seen folks say, as a result of leading this team through this objective that led to this very important and visible outcome, I was honored with this award. I also think that that's okay. But perhaps there are honors that are further back in your background, whatever the case may be. But again, resumes, you can see that they're highly customizable, and there's not always a direct formula that works for everyone. So there is some nuance, and talk to colleagues and trusted mentors, perhaps a career coach. But it's really up to you, especially when it gets to the optional sections. And we'll keep moving. Okay, so I talked about how I really prefer bullet points because I think that they are effective and clearly communicate who you are, the value you bring, and the outcomes that you can drive. So I'm going to focus the next few moments on how to craft a strong bullet point on your resume. So we often get asked, okay, how many bullet points should I have under each experience? And the answer is, it really depends. So I would say a general rule of thumb is probably 3 to 8, depending on the role and how long you've been there. So I know for many of you, perhaps you've been in your current role for over 5 to 10 years. Obviously, you've perhaps done many different things, and that would warrant on the higher side of this. So maybe 8 bullet points. So just, again, it's really up to you, and use your best judgment. And again, seek feedback from folks who know your industry and mentors who know you. But it's anywhere between 3 and 8. I do say if you are having a harder time crafting more, or at least 3 under an experience, it might be time to ask yourself if that experience is truly relevant to that position and does it belong? Again, it's that precious real estate of the 1 to 2 pages. Okay, what does a strong bullet point include? So strong bullet points first start with an action verb and in the correct tense. So by that, I mean, for any position that you currently hold, you will want the verb in present tense. And for any positions that you no longer hold, past tense. And I know that sounds really obvious, but as someone who's also been on review panels and selection committees for a number of years, I often see that this detail is overlooked. So you want to have a strong action verb in the correct tense. You want action-oriented details and quantifiable metrics whenever possible. So you really want to tell them what you did, what action you owned or took, and what that what the scope was, or what the quantity was. And then this is one that I often see missing on resumes, but also in interviews, by the way. What was the outcome or result? What outcome or result did you drive from these actions? This shows how you impact a company or a project. This shows what you're capable of, and ultimately what happened because of you or because of your contributions. So here is it is long, but a very comprehensive bullet point that I thank Kristen for drafting, but led an enterprise-wide risk assessment across 6 program offices, documenting over 45 strategic, operational, and compliance risks in alignment with OMB Circular A123 requirements and briefing findings through established governance bodies to support senior leadership deliberations on agency priority setting and resource alignment. A lot of the work that you do in government is really complex, as this bullet point may suggest. But you see here that there is a strong action verb. It immediately lets the reviewer know that you are a leader and that you owned and led this risk assessment. It was across 6 program offices, so that required likely a lot of coordination. Most folks would know that you had to document quite a bit. And why did this matter? Because it informed senior leadership deliberations on how to set the agency priorities, which is a pretty big deal. Okay. This is another question that we see a lot, especially in government. I know I've had this question for some of my previous roles. So what if you've grown within the same role over time? Or what if you were promoted to a new position or a higher position within your agency or your office? First of all, that's great. To show that trajectory of growth is awesome. So what you're going to do is you're going to have that employer as a single heading. So if you're at the EPA, you'll have the Environmental Protection Agency, and then under it, you'll have multiple experiences based on the different roles. You'll have the dates for each, so the reader can clearly see, okay, they've been with the EPA since 2007, but they were in that first role for 5 years, and then they got promoted in 2012, and then they got promoted again. So it's the same rule that I talked about before with the reverse chronology. If you're at the EPA, you would obviously have the position you're currently in or were most recently in at the top, and then you will show that growth, because it'll work on down to the position in which you entered the EPA. So you're going to use that single job title, and they'll kind of be like subheadings under that ultimate umbrella of the EPA. So you'll, again, list that most recent job at the top, and you'll have bullet points under each, just as you would with any experience. And again, you want to highlight key achievements. So if there were clear, and I kind of talked about this before, like milestone projects or really big recognizable achievements that you made, you would put that there because that shows that growth trajectory. So here's a really nice example. I won't read the entire thing to you in the interest of time, but you can see here that this person is in the Enterprise Risk Management Office at the Department of Treasury. And you can see here that they came in as a program assistant, moved up to specialist, and then deputy program manager. And again, this will be recorded, so you'll be able to reference this again, but in the interest of time, I will move forward. Okay, so with that, we'll take some questions at the end. I acknowledge that they may be coming in, and I thank you for them, but I'll turn it over to Kristen to talk about how to articulate transferable skills.
Thank you, Katie. And I'm so glad the panel was a real complement to the content that we're presenting today. I know we've already touched on, the panelists have some of the key skills that you are utilizing regularly and how they translate in your current work, but also into other sectors. So we're just going to build on that for a moment and share some examples. Skills assessment is so important. I encourage you to continue to do the work of thinking about the skills that you possess and also the work that you enjoy doing. That's really the sweet spot you're looking for anytime you're thinking about a career or job transition, is what do I enjoy doing that I'm also highly skilled in. This table is certainly not comprehensive, but meant to help you think about the skills you may currently utilize in your roles, how that skill could be defined or titled in the private sector as an example, and then why or how it translates. So again, you will have access to this afterwards. You can always refer back to, but really calling out, as some of our panelists did, things like creating risk summaries and dashboards. You are adept at turning complex information and compiling and aggregating a lot of data and information and making it easily digestible to whoever the audience may be and adapting to different audiences. That is a hugely desirable skill that you can spin in a number of ways depending on the type of role you're applying to and the specific sector. We're going to put in the chat, the partnership has a lot of resources that we have developed about skills assessment. We have, I believe, a blog post, a webinar where we've referenced this work before, and we also developed a skills assessment worksheet specifically for current and former feds to help you take stock of the many, often highly specialized skills that you possess. So I encourage all of you to spend some time doing that work. Katie and I always like to say, the worst time to apply to something, to a role, is when the deadline is in 24 hours and you are frantically updating your resume and trying to do all of this work to think about your skills and how to tell the story of your professional experience. So even if you're not in the market to make a transition, or if you're staying within government, it is still worthwhile to do this introspective work to think about your skills. All right, and for the sake of time, I will move forward. Translating across sectors, this bullet point might look familiar to you. It is the bullet point that Katie used on her previous slide for crafting a strong bullet point. And as she mentioned, it is long and pretty verbose and very specific to a federal audience. It has a lot of jargon. So we wanted to use it as an example. That was intentional on our part to have this bit of a longer bullet with a lot of jargon in it to demonstrate, while that might be appropriate on a federal resume to go into that level of detail, how would we want to scale that back and change language if we're thinking about crafting bullets for the private or nonprofit sector? So here is an example of how we would change this language. And I've highlighted in red the specific areas where we decided to adjust. So from program offices to business units, that's very specific, but it may just be language that appeals more to a private sector employer, especially if they're using AI to do an initial pass of resumes. You wouldn't be looking to mirror language like that and always defer to the job description itself. How is the organization referring to themselves, their work, their structure, and how can you mirror that in your bullets on your resume? We also really took out all of that specific language around the OMB article requirements and just indicated that you're, following a creating this risk profile that's informing decision-making at the executive level. So taking out the specific reference to the article that you're following and just having it be more about the work itself and the outcome. And we have one more example to share. This is a new bullet, new experience about facilitating working sessions, also working within parameters of that specific article, and the output of that resulting in a 30% reduction in open risk items reported within that quarterly cycle. So subtle changes again, but something like facilitated, that might be more of a skill set or action that is familiar in the federal space that you really want to own your leadership of that. Instead of talking about the 12 plus inter-office working sessions, referring to that as cross-functional workshops, again, more private sector friendly language. And then really cleaning up the second half of this bullet to, again, get right to the point of what was the output, the result. As Katie mentioned, so important to include that in your strong bullet points about what was the actual outcome of this work, why did it matter, what was the impact, while still keeping in those quantifiable pieces, just taking out that federal specific jargon. And then a few final points on tailoring your resume. So as I mentioned before, we like to say our resume advice is like a recipe. You don't have to follow it specifically. It is a guide. So our advice is just a guide to you. It's not going to be comprehensive, one size fits all. So you'll take what resonates. You can leave the rest. Ultimately, trust your gut. The panel also talked about your instincts, right? Hairs on the back of your neck. Follow that with what you feel true and good in your resume and your professional materials. So tailoring your resume, you also always want to defer to the job description, as I mentioned, looking for those keywords. That is something that is universal across sectors. You want to make sure that your resume is matching keywords used by the employer and used in the job description. So it's going to require a different emphasis on the skills that you're uplifting and really highlighting. A great tip, if you have access to 2 screens, is to have your resume on one screen and then the job description on another, and really just work back and forth between the two to reference the keywords used in the job description and then mirror those in your resume. If you do not have access to 2 screens and you are able to print one or both documents, the job description and your resume, that works well too. And you can just pen to paper, sort of move through, highlight, circle to mirror that language. Also love to remind folks that a resume is a capability statement and not a comprehensive list of everything you have ever done. In the next slide, we're going to talk about a rolling resume, which is the place that can be a comprehensive list of everything that you have ever done. This is one of my favorite tips that we like to share. A rolling resume is an internal document. It is just for you, not shared out with employers. And I know that we are moving through content very quickly today. If you would like to get deeper into all things resume, please refer back to our Career Pivot Bootcamp course. We have a whole module on resumes that will go a lot deeper. But I think the rolling resume, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you have a very long, comprehensive federal resume, this is a great place to start, because your federal resume is essentially your rolling resume. It is likely highly comprehensive. It's going to have everything you've ever done on it, all of your volunteer, your awards, affiliations, accomplishments. It is where you can just dump everything. And then that is what you use to then build your curated, tailored resumes for the roles that you're applying for. So you can treat it like a menu, essentially, where you can just pull the bullets that align best as you're trying to edit down to that 1 to 2 page private sector resume and make sure it's really aligned and tailored to the job you're applying for. And then another perfectly aligned theme to close us out. I know AI came up several times in our panel, particularly how you may utilize it professionally to, automate and improve turnaround time on tasks. We're going to talk about AI in the personal sense of how you might use it to support updating your professional materials and also throughout the job search process. We will share in the chat. We've also done several webinars that will be a whole hour deep dive on how to utilize AI. So this is very high level. We encourage you to check out our blog posts that we will share in the chat, and also those webinars if you would like to learn more. And for the purpose of this conversation, I always like to caveat, you do not have to use AI to update your resume, to help prep for an interview, to help with your job search. It is a tool that is available to you. It is not the only tool. It is not a requirement, but it does exist. And I think it's helpful to know how to use it ethically and in a way that gets you the results that are most helpful to you. A few other caveats: just be careful with AI generated resumes. It is also becoming common for employers to have ways, to assess if you have used AI in crafting your resume. Resumes also start to look and sound very generic. So you want to make sure that if you are utilizing AI, you're still maintaining your authentic tone, language, voice. It feels like you. You don't want it to feel like everyone else, to feel like every other AI generated resume. You want to make sure that you are still in it. You also don't want to put personal or sensitive information into an AI tool. So if you are uploading your resume into, for example, ChatGPT, you want to make sure you're scrubbing off your name, email, phone number, address, any other personal information that you may have included, just to protect yourself from having that out there. And then we also like to say that AI generated resumes should be a starting point to work from, that you can edit and incorporate your own voice. It should never be your final product without having a pass through and really editing it. So how to train AI effectively. And this is actually our last slide. I know we have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to go through this and then we'll be able to take a few questions before closing out. So how to build an effective prompt. You want it to be clear and specific. That is going to get you the best result. So a simple formula to think of is role plus goal plus context equals a better result. For example, you could put into a generative AI tool, act as a hiring manager. That is the role that you are giving the tool. The context and goal, I'm applying for a communications role in the public sector. So there's your context. Based on my resume, and you can upload your resume, what skills should I highlight to match this job description? So you can also upload the job description. So now the tool is a very clear idea of you're applying for this role, I have your resume. You want to make sure that there is alignment between the two. And if you don't get the results you like, that AI is certainly not perfect. And so you want to be a careful editor and you can ask follow-up questions. So if something doesn't ring true, you can ask, for their source, ask them for more, or, the tool for more information. Can you make this more concise? Can you make this warmer, more firm, more conversational? Can you make sure that you're using language that aligns with this particular employer or sector I'm applying to? So don't be afraid to really give strong critique and feedback to the tool to make sure you're getting the output that is most useful for you. With that, I am going to stop sharing and we can go ahead and take a couple questions from the chat. Do just want to remind folks that the webinar will abruptly end at 1:30. So we'll try and get in at least one question.
Yeah, I can read and take the first pass at this one. So someone asked, is it better to put government and private sector experience in separate sections on the resume? I would say no, because it's that reverse chronology. And again, for the industry or the non-federal resume, you really want to focus on the most relevant. You want to tell your story. So here's where I've been through your career in reverse chronology. I think it could be confusing to do like a government section and a non-government. The last thing I'll say is that you are telling a story of transferable skills and a journey, not a segmented, here's what I did in government and here's what I did in industry. It's also not a bad thing to show that you've been able to go between the two different sectors. So I would really stick with that reverse chronology and not separate. Kristen, would you share anything different?
No, I think that's spot on.
Awesome. The next question, thank you for the resume information. You're welcome. We love being here. What's the best way to portray a detail assignment? So details, of course, being those short or long-term experience assignments away from your permanent position. How do you do that in a positive way? Some feedback I've received is that details can make it seem like you moved around roles a lot over a short period of time. That's a great question, especially because the detail positions may not be as recognizable or familiar to folks outside of government. What I have seen done, though I'd love to hear from Kristen, is folks will make it a separate position from your permanent position, but make it really clear that it was a short term that you were then sent back to your previous position. So I've seen folks in bold put detail position to last 6 months before returning to permanent position at EPA, just to really make that clear and keep it separate. I think you should be okay. I'd be prepared to explain it proactively, perhaps in an interview. Although if they've invited you to an interview, it's not been identified as a major issue. Kristen, what would you share?
I would add if you can work into the bullet that you were selected or identified for this
yes.
detail based on specific skills that you possess, that you were a thought leader or subject matter expert in your field and were brought on to lead a specific program or process that was very time bound. And then, yes, as Katie mentioned, that you're returning to your original role. It may just take some extra explanation, especially for private sector that's not familiar with that detail format, that it's not jumping around. It's actually something pretty specialized that you were called in to do and then reintegrate back into your regular work, which takes a lot of skill as well to move between roles and different programs in that way.
And I see Natalie. I know we're at time. Natalie, was there any, whoops, to close us out?
Yes, thank you, Katie and Kristen, for your wonderful knowledge on resumes. As I said before, this session was recorded, so you can revisit all of this content once we get this posted on the partnership's website and our YouTube channel. I did just want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. We know everyone is busy, and we appreciate sharing your time with us. Don't forget to visit our FedSupport website for federal employees. In the meantime, you can find our upcoming webinars, topics, our FAQs, blogs, and links to additional resources there, as well as this recording, as I said. And again, just to end, for all the federal employees out there, thank you for your service, and I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon.